Many animals have amazing abilities that make them especially formidable and ferocious. But few are so terrible and mighty that they could be classified as a natural disaster. No, we're not talking about a giant nuclear lizard. We're talking about an insect so ravenous in disposition and so immense in numbers that it strikes fear into the hearts of those in its path. The desert locust is proof that the balance of nature can shift with the wind. A breeze can be a welcome respite from the blazing sun, but it may also carry disaster in life, death, and taxonomy. Welcome back to Life, Death, and Taxonomy. It's your 30 minutes of interesting animal info. I'm Joe.
And I'm Carlos.
Thank you to Cassie for the creation of our theme song. To hear more of Cassie's music, search Cassie Michelle on YouTube. And today we're talking about a deadly insect that's carried on the winds of change. But more on that later.
Wait, do you hear that? It's the winds of change.
What's that from?
That's what Randall says to Mike Wazowski. You hear that? You hear the winds of change?
But yeah, we're talking about today, the desert locust.
That's what I'm supposed to say. You're stealing all of my thunder.
You can say it.
Hey, guess what, guys? You'll never guess what animal we're doing. It's the desert locust. It feels good.
But it's a rare instance of us covering something kind of topical, and we'll talk about that later.
It is kind of topical, if I read you correctly. We don't compare notes before we do this show. We just kind of do research and have fun with it. So I'll be surprised. But we're going to call it here, not the desert locust. That's so bland, unless you put a little bit of honey on it. We're going to call it the mass muncher. And, speaking of honey, Honest John's holy honey snacks. Because John the Baptist ate locusts and honey in the wilderness. That's a joke for the Bible scholar.
We're going to have more Bible scholarly things in a bit.
Yeah, this is a very biblical bug. That's another one. The biblical bug.
Nice.
Biblical bug, mass muncher, and Honest John's holy honey snacks. We have to science this.
Let's science
this little bug. Or maybe not that little, actually. So it's in a kingdom you know, love, and are in, and that kingdom is Animalia. The phylum is Arthropoda. The class is Insecta. And the order is Orthoptera. The suborder is Califera, which sounds like the Greek word for good morning, which is Kalimera.
Kalima Shakti Day.
We can edit that out because we don't allow profanity on this show. What does that mean?
It's what the weird shaman guy says when he's in Indiana Jones 2? What, Temple of Doom? Whichever one that was.
There's no way you can get me to memorize a single line. Well, okay, I can memorize a couple lines from Indiana Jones 2, but that definitely not the shaman spells. The only line I remember is "Okie dokie, Dr. Jones," and everything goes. The family is Acrididae. The subfamily is, here we go. Oh man, I should have practiced these. I usually do, but I didn't get around to it. Certacanthracrinidae. Certacanthracrinidae. This is one of the longest words we've had. The tribe is Certacanthracrinidae. Certacanthracrinidae. Yeah. And the genus is Schistoserica, and the species is gregaria. So the binomial nomenclature is Schistoserica gregaria. I apologize for everyone listening for just that abysmal pronunciation. But since we're in the business of naming things, it's time for cue the music, my favorite part of the show, critter groups. The part of the show where I ask you, Joe, a question, and the question is the same every time. What is the name of a group of this animal, which is extremely pertinent to locusts, or what is the term of venery, or what is the collective noun? Now, I know you know what the collective noun for the locust is, but there are some other ones. So it's gonna be the B squad for collective nouns. So if you saw a group of locusts after trembling in mortal fear and hiding your crops, would you say that's a cloud of locusts, B, myriad of locusts, C, cataclysm of locusts, or D, pillar of locusts?
I'm going to say a cloud. Final answer.
Ding, 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 you're correct. The answer
Nice.
is cloud.
I can see that. It looks kind of like a cloud.
Yeah, I was hoping just to kind of muddy the water there, but the most popular one, of course, is a plague of locusts, which
Yes.
I knew you knew, so I couldn't put that in. Also, could not find for the life of me the meaning of Schistosera gregaria. I mean, gregaria speaks for itself, but Schistoserica? Serica means near in Spanish. So, I don't know. All I could find for it was that it was a genus of grasshoppers. So, let me talk about what this thing looks like. And we'll talk more about what it looks like in the major fact. But for now, picture a grasshopper, because that's what this is. I didn't know this. I didn't know that locusts were actually just a variant of grasshoppers. I thought they were a completely different kind of insect. But no, they have long bodies with even longer, clear, kind of dragonfly-esque wings that are rounded at the edges. They have 6 legs, like all insects do, but their back legs are super long and are inverted, so it arcs straight up and then down in an isosceles triangle, no, equilateral triangle kind of shape, and they do a lot with these legs, and I'm sure you'll talk about that. I don't want to step on your toes too much. They have, I'd say, pretty big heads for an insect, with giant bug eyes and very sharp mandibles for ripping and tearing plants. They are either green or yellow and black, depending on some specific criteria. But for the most part, they are green and through and through. So they basically look like regular grasshoppers for most of the time.
They can be brown depending on the food they eat, or the food that surrounds, or the environment around them, rather. So if they're in a brown area, they might be brown.
It makes sense. They're like flamingos.
I don't have much on their legs except for that they hop.
Oh, really? Well, in that case, I'll save my leg fact for the appropriate time.
Okay.
But their legs are very sensitive, and they have sharp spines running along the backs of their legs for clinging onto things. And they also have 2 long antennae that stick up from the middle of their heads, and then some protective carapace around their thorax. Right? Yes, the thorax is the middle part. Yeah, so it's a big grasshopper, and here in Jacksonville we have some big grasshoppers.
Oh,
Used to
really?
the ones in South Florida that get to be about I don't know, half an inch, and they're cute. And I used to catch them when I was in Boy Scouts. But these are like 3 to 4 inches long. They're huge, and they're dumb, and they can't see very well. So they can like run into you. So you're just like, oh, who threw a rock at me? And it's a grasshopper. And they also scare the bananas out of my dogs, and it's hilarious. So speaking of size, how big are these notorious grasshoppers?
Speaking of size, indeed. Okay, that brings us to the beloved Measure Up segment, the official listener's favorite part of the show, the part of the show when we present the animal size and dimensions in relatable terms through a quiz that's fun for the whole family. It's also the part of the show that's introduced by you when you send an audio of yourself saying, singing, or chittering. The words measure up into ldtaxonomy@gmail.com. We do have a new Measure Up intro
Nice.
this week from our friend Natalie. She has a cool podcast called Across the Ages, in which she talks about a specific topic and its history. Her first episode was about shoes.
Oh,
And it's
interesting.
very good. And she's on episode 3 now.
I'm going to have to check that out.
And it's around 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes, just like ours. So it's a bite-sized piece of a chunk of history about stuff that you take for granted. So it's very good. Without further ado, the listener's favorite part of the show.
It's time for Measure Up.
Very boisterous, very British.
So I asked her if I should give you a bonus point if you can guess where she is from.
Oh, I'm going to have to listen to that a couple more times.
You could listen to the podcast.
That's true. If I listened to the podcast, I'd probably have a better idea instead of just the 4 words that she just said. 5 words.
I'll give you a hint. It's in the UK.
Oh, wow. So I have one of 3. I have a 33% chance of guessing.
Do you think so?
Oh,
Well,
I guess not.
okay,
If you
so
include Wales.
There are many
Yes,
regional accents.
more regional accents in the UK than there are in English around the world. So are you saying like if it's either England, Wales, Scotland, or Northern Ireland?
No,
I'm gonna guess
I was
England.
saying like, what's the? That's correct. But specifically, she has a Midlands accent. That's what she said.
There was exactly a 0% chance of me ever guessing that.
She said, I said, should I ask him where specifically you're from? She said, sure, that would be funny. Non-Brit struggle with anything other than generic British. I was like, haha, yeah, where is your accent from?
You're like, haha, yeah, but I need the answer, please.
Yeah.
No, I can tell a Manchester accent. I can sometimes pick out a Welsh accent, but I'm not really that great at figuring it out. I'm very bad at telling the difference between high Australian and New Zealand. So I'm not that great at picking out accents.
But thank you, Natalie. That was a solid Measure Up
Yeah,
intro.
thank you. The only reason I know a Manchester accent is because of Daphne from Frasier.
It is pouring. I don't know if you can hear that, but if you can hear a whooshing in the background, that's the rain.
It is about to pour here, so it'll just be whooshing all around. It's not Locust.
Okay, let's get into length. They're about 0.5 to 3 inches. Let's go with the upper end of average, so 3 inches or 7.6 centimeters. So how many locusts go into the tallest sand dunes in the world?
Wonder where that would be. The Sahara?
Well, here's a hint. The largest sand dune is Duna Frederico Quirbus in Argentina.
Oh, that's what I thought.
Dark horse.
Oh, I was thinking it was in Is it the Atacama Desert? That can't be right. Atacama is desert in Spanish. The desert that was I was thinking it was on the other side of the Andes. And I've been there.
I guess like I think of like the Sahara when I think of like the dunes in I associate the dunes of like Tatooine and stuff, like when they're walking in the desert with like the Sahara, but it's actually in Death Valley usually.
No,
That's where-
I think they filmed that A New Hope in both I think Morocco and Death Valley. So some of it was in Death Valley, but I think the dune scene. I don't think there's any like dunes
huge
dunes as far as the eye can see in Death Valley, or in the States for that matter.
Now that's interesting. That's attention to detail. Your planet has 2 different kinds of desert in it.
So does ours, believe it or not.
Yeah, that's true.
In the Star Wars world, your planet can only have one ecosystem. You're either forest or ice or water or desert.
And then on Naboo, you can be underwater or not underwater.
The choices are endless. So I'm gonna assume that these dunes are 400 feet tall. It's like a big foothill. And then you see these 3 inches.
3 inches. 7.5 centimeters.
1600 then. 1,600 locusts go into... You said the tallest in the world? 400 is probably way too small. I'll double it. And so I'll say that there are 3,200 locusts.
Final answer?
Yep. I'm probably way off. 800 feet seems really small too, but whatever. Let's go with it.
Are you sure? Well, the correct answer was 16,000 locusts, 16,184. The dune is 4,035 feet or 1,230 meters.
That is a veritable mountain.
It is. It's actually only like 100 meters, or it's just barely smaller than Ben Nevis in Scotland, which is the largest mountain in the UK.
I would not have assumed that. I just don't see dunes getting that tall, but...
Let's talk weight before I am washed away.
I can't hear the rain, but I could hear the thunder, so...
Let's talk weight. They're about 2 grams or 0.07 ounces. How many grains of rice would a locust have to eat its weight in rice?
Very ominous rice. How heavy did you say they were? I couldn't find their weight.
2 grams, 0.07 ounces.
0.07 ounces.
They can actually eat their weight in food. In a single sitting, and a single hopping. Here's a hint. Rice is a major crop all over the world, including East Africa.
Are we talking long rice? Long grain? Short grain? Brown? Yellow? White?
I'm not sure.
What kind of rice?
A type of rice, I'm sure. I guess rice is just a grain, you know.
Does it have a name carved into it?
Of it. The Book of Genesis written on it.
The entire Book of Genesis is written on this grain of rice. I don't know, 100. This is really a shot in the dark. Especially with the tiny weights, I have no idea. Yeah, I'll say 100. 100 grains of rice go into the weight of this of one locust.
Okay, the correct answer is 69 grains.
Ooh, that was not as far off as I thought it was going to be.
A grain of rice is about 0.029 grams.
Okay, I'm glad I didn't go with a grain of rice being 1 gram.
That's all I got for Measure Up. You got any fast facts before we get into the major fact, which is a doozy?
Yes, I do. So, what you might be wondering what these guys eat. Well, they'll eat anything green. Everything from grass to trees to crops to Shrek to Ireland. Nothing is sacred. Nothing is safe. They come, they eat, they leave. That was a...
You said to Shrek?
Maybe.
Well, it's worth noting that if you're ever like swarmed by a locust, they're probably not going to bite you intentionally.
Yeah.
And if they do, they might nibble and not break the skin.
That sounds like a pleasant experience. I would probably enjoy it. It's like Pleakley from Lilo and Stitch. They're nuzzling me with their noses. So they have 3 major stages in their life cycle. They're an egg, a nymph, or a hopper, and an adult. So once they hatch, a hopper can take anywhere from 2 weeks to 6 months to mature into a flying adult. And the reason for that variation is based on weather and the availability of food. So if food is scarce and the weather is bad, then it'll take the full 6 months. But if everything is going great, then it'll take 2 weeks.
If you ever get in a fight with a friend, like, do grasshoppers have wings? Yes, they do, and no, they don't. Because nymphs look exactly like regular grasshoppers, but they don't have wings.
Yeah, it's like, do ants have wings? Some of them do, some of them don't. I mean, if you think about it, it's like their maturity will take 12 times longer if there is less food. Or 12 times faster if there is lots of food. So, if you can go from being a kid to a kid to a squid, 40-year-old squid. in 12 times the amount of 12 times faster. 12 times. And so what happens is male hoppers tend to mature earlier, and then once they do, they start giving off a chemical smell that makes the females mature. And that just gets everybody hot and bothered. And then we get more locusts. But that's all I got, because anything else would be encroaching on major fact territory.
Okay, so jump in anywhere you have facts that you couldn't say.
My leg facts.
Yeah.
My juicy leg facts.
Legs. So, the major fact. A plague of locusts. Locust swarms, and that behavior has been observed for thousands of years. In the Bible, it's associated with God's wrath, and in the book of Joel, a locust swarm is compared to an invading army in the totality of its destructive power. In fact, Joel says, at the sight of them, nations are in anguish. Every face turns pale. They charge like warriors. They scale walls like soldiers. They march in line, not swerving from their course.
Yeah, even John in Revelation says that he sees locusts with the faces of men shooting fire from their mouths, which of course means helicopters. So take that little tidbit and put that into your eschatology.
Because a helicopter has the face of a man.
It's in there somewhere behind the glass.
Desert locusts are a species of grasshopper, like you said. Most of the time, they act like any grasshopper would. They hop around, eat leaves, and look for a mate. For the most part, they don't spend too much time together and prefer the solitary lifestyle. They only come together to procreate. This is called their solitary phase. But something strange happens when the weather changes.
Okay.
This is so... I'm so glad there's a monsoon outside. It's very appropriate. During a period of drought, vegetation is choked out and food becomes scarce. When that drought is interrupted by excessive rains, something changes in the locust. The sudden increase in water creates a breeding boom. Locusts like to lay their eggs in soft, damp soil or damp, leaf litter.
Ominous litter.
The new greenery becomes the object of intense competition among grasshoppers. They enter what's called their gregarious phase.
Okay, here's where I get to interject. Because the method of entering into this gregarious phase, so like you said, the rain will come, vegetation will sprout, and then all the locusts in the area will come to this vegetation to feed and will compete for it, and they'll rub elbows, literally. And the actual bumping up of their hind legs together will stimulate a metabolic change that transforms them from the solitary to the gregarious phase.
Yeah. So the change isn't just behavioral. They do change behaviorally. In fact, their brains grow from one phase to the next, but they also look different. Like you said, they're green or a solid brown, but depending on their surroundings. But then when they enter their gregarious phase, instead of blending in with their surroundings, they change to a bold black and yellow coloration. Maybe this is an adaptation from camouflage to pattern disruption as they clump together in groups. So they go from I'm going to blend into this tree to I need to be like a zebra and disrupt our patterns as we swarm together.
It's like a mega evolution.
Yeah.
Like a temporary, this isn't even my final form.
In the solitary phase, winged adults tend to fly at night to avoid predation. The winged adults fly in the broad daylight in the gregarious phase. So the change also makes them ravenous. The millions of new grasshoppers all want to eat their fill, so each individual wants to eat as much as they can sink their mouth parts into. So with the new bold colors, they adapt bold attitudes, swarming in droves during daylight hours, in swarms large enough that they can blot out the sun, literally. Swarms travel with the wind at the same speed as the wind. So instead of flying off in different directions to spread out their destruction, they're concentrated onto farms and fields downwind. Nymphs, which look like the adults but have no wings, like we mentioned, can march in huge swarms about 7 kilometers each day. As adults, though, they can travel 150 kilometers in a day. And a swarm can have as many as 150 million locusts per square kilometer. And a single a square kilometer, there are enough locusts to circumnavigate the moon.
How many square kilometers are...
That's a good question. Each square kilometer can eat the same amount of food as 35,000 people. A swarm can be as large as 460 square kilometers, or 1,191 square kilometers, or 460 square miles.
So that's... Did you do the calculation?
Of how many millions? No. 150 million times...
460.
No, 1,191 square kilometers.
Oh.
460 square miles.
Oh, it's 460 square miles. Okay. All right, it's 178 billion.
Yeah. That's a huge group of... So, like, if each one of these square kilometers is eating 35,000 people's worth of food, it's millions of people's worth of food, right? In a large swarm?
Yeah, it's 41.5 million people's... it's the amount of food that 41.5 million people can eat.
So that's a devastating food loss for an area that's affected by these swarms. So there's currently a locust crisis happening in East Africa that's devastating crops in Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia, Yemen, and Sudan. So the origins are thought to be an abnormal amount of tropical cyclones that dumped rain onto the Rub al Khali Desert, which is on the Arabian Peninsula. So that started in 2018. Sand dunes separate thousands of lakes for the first time in 20 years. So whenever you see like rain dumped on a duney desert, it's like thousands of little lakes form. So the cyclones created extreme flooding all over the Arabian Peninsula and in East Africa. The unusual desert weather triggered the locust population boom and then a gregarious phase. That there were 2 really big cyclones in 2018, and then for the next year, 2019, there was a bunch of cyclones that were uncharacteristically dumping water in these desert and dry regions. And dry regions often don't handle flooding well, so there was devastating flooding happening in East Africa and in the Arabian Peninsula. So in 2020, massive swarms threatened food production in regions that were already struggling with food shortages, and then COVID-19 has hampered attempts to get ahead of the hoppers, making 2020 seem like an actual biblical plagues were happening in places that experienced the storms, flooding, locusts, and then also a pandemic. So not a good time in those regions.
I mean, I'm looking at pictures of this, and it is nuts. I can't imagine being in the midst of all of these locusts.
Well, and then also food shortages destabilize, different areas, leading to unrest and violence. So researchers have found ways to curb the locust swarms by tapping into their own chemical communications. So there is some fighting this with traditional pesticides, but it's hard to squash a billion-strong swarm that can travel that far in a day. So they have identified a single chemical that turns solitary locusts into gregarious ones and attract them together. So usually chemical communications among insects are more complicated. And we've talked a little bit about that with different... I think we talked a little bit about chemical communication in the thorn bugs.
Yeah.
But they think it's one chemical that kind of triggers this. So that may allow them to set traps that are baited with this chemical. There may also be a way to chemically confuse the locusts in their nymph stage in order to break up swarms. But it needs to be done before they take flight, and the best way to do that is to find egg clusters before they hatch, which are laid in soft soils. So like in places that have been fighting this for like 3 years, they're getting pretty good at locating these egg clusters. But as it spreads to new areas, they're like trying to catch up to deal with these things. And they actually, I read that they were using the CRISPR gene to manipulate locust DNA to like stop the gregarious phase.
Interesting. Yeah, they looks like they've isolated the pheromone that allows hoppers to identify each other as hoppers. And for adults to identify each other as adults. So if they introduce the adult pheromone to the hoppers, the nymphs, then they get confused. They don't know who's what, and then the swarm will just dissipate. It's like a Tower of Babel. They'll just kind of go their separate ways and go from gregarious back to solitary.
Yeah. Currently, there's a second generation of swarming locusts that hatched, and they're forming small, immature swarms in Somalia, Kenya, and Ethiopia. And then small swarms of adults are forming in Sudan. And then wingless hopper bands have been seen in Saudi Arabia and along the Red Sea. So it's crazy. This is like a huge, catastrophic event that's happening in these areas. And it's kind of being overshadowed by COVID-19. But they're also experiencing COVID-19. So it's a mess. But they're doing some pretty interesting things to deal with it.
My father-in-law is a dairy consultant in the Middle East, so I wonder if he's coming over in a few days. I'll have to ask him if he's encountered these locusts, because
they do say that like it's a big problem that they go after fodder, so it even hurts cattle raising.
Yeah, unless you can put them into like an enclosed space. But I'm sure these little guys can worm their way into wherever they need to go.
Yeah, they crawl, they ascend the walls, like Joel says.
And there's a picture on Wikipedia of a hopper band. So these are the guys that they can't fly. They're in the nymph stage, and it's just like a coating of grass
that's moving.
That's moving. Yeah. I mean, I don't like grasshoppers. Aren't really that gross, but just that many bugs in one place.
I bet there's places that have gone the way of John the Baptist in that they have to eat them.
Yeah. They're actually like they are eaten for sure. Yeah.
High in protein.
So it's like, oh, they ate all of the food. I guess we'll just eat them.
Oh, they also said that when they break them up, they use that chemical to like kind of break up the swarms. They're more vulnerable to predation. So birds are more likely to come in and start eating them when they're not like clumped together and swarming.
Yeah, I would be much less likely
advantage of that
to try to eat a locust as a bird if they were all together like that.
Well,
I don't think they would actually do very much to the bird, but still.
I think it also has to do with it's hard to catch them when they're swarming because of maybe not when they're flying, maybe not when they're on the ground, but like because of that pattern disruption, it's hard to isolate a single one.
Yeah, you go in like a whale shark with your mouth open.
Yeah.
Well, apparently, so when they are in their solitary state, doing whatever solitary locusts do, it's called a recession.
Oh,
and
that's appropriate.
And then when they get going, it's called an outbreak. And when it's at this level with billions and billions, it's called a plague. So
it's appropriate naming conventions.
Yes. So the only time a recession is a good thing is when it's about locusts.
I try to find I'm sure there are. I'm try to find ways that you could help, but I didn't immediately find anything. I'm sure that I didn't look hard enough, but learn about it. Click on some of the links on ldtaxonomy.com/desert-locust probably.
Yeah.
And yeah, get more info. It's crazy. It's really funny because I had read Joel a couple months ago, and he says stuff like they blot out the moon and stars, they march shoulder to shoulder, and then when I was doing research, I'm reading stuff their swarms are so thick that they actually travel touching one another, and they travel in unison like that. And also that they can literally blot out the sun. I'm like, wow, this is a pretty apt description.
It's apocalyptic.
Yeah. That's all I got. We're rooting for those scientists that are using really cool CRISPR stuff.
Yeah, that's a
hack.
very interesting technology, gene hacking.
It was just like the vaccine. It's what people can do when they have to,
Well, they've had CRISPR for a long time. CRISPR technology.
Oh, no, yeah. But when you're what do we do about these locusts that are unstoppable? We got to hack their DNA.
Yeah, that's crazy. One guy's we need a really big net, and the other guy's we need to hack their DNA. And they're like, okay, we're going to do the DNA thing, but the net's a close second. We'll fall back on that if the DNA thing doesn't work. Someone needs to start weaving some real tight threads there. That was the desert locust. For you out there in Podcastia, get together in large groups. If you're, if you're family and stuff, I guess.
Yeah, that's not
change your. I just realized.
Not a good time.
That was not the best advice. Get together. We'll say that with your family.
Maybe virtually.
Change your colors and feast your heart out like the desert locust here at Life, Death, and Taxonomy.
Hey, LDT listeners. Thanks for listening to the end of the episode. For your loyalty, you get a shameless self-promotion from us. If you haven't already, leaving a review on your favorite podcast app can really help us grow. But telling your podcast-loving friends about us is even better. Also, don't forget to send in your Measure Up intros and animal suggestions to ldtaxonomy@gmail.com. We love hearing from you. As always, thanks, most of all, for listening.
Life, Death, and Taxonomy is my favorite in the world podcast.
Ooh, with that lightning? Ooh!
There it is.
1 second. I'm going to unlock the door for Johanna because she's on her way home.
Ooh, that would be unpleasant.
Yeah.